All right, so this is going to be the companion video to another video I made called "People Are Biased by Their Personal Experience." Right? This one is about how people say, "Well, you should see it from their perspective," right? And I'm going to make one of 2 points about that. There's 2 points especially that I have to make. This is going to be about one of them. The point I'm not going to discuss at length is the line from Tupac, right? I didn't choose the thug life. The thug life chose me. Right? Now I'm going to do a separate video about that. I generalize it to be, I didn't choose X life chose me, right? And I have a lot of sympathy for that position, okay? So keep that in mind throughout the rest of these discussions. And also I say a lot about my views of, you should see it from their perspective in my bias by personal experience video. So in this video, I'm going to discuss a little remarked power of literature, right? Literature allows you to see something from someone else's perspective, right? That's one of the values of it, right? And you would think it would be more remarked on, but it isn't, because if we were to confront this power of literature honestly, then the power of the remark, you should see it from their perspective, loses some of its power, right? Because when people say that to me, it's like, well, how do you know I haven't seen it from their perspective? Like, just because I disagree with you? That's what people think. It's like, oh, you disagree with me? Well, you should see it from their perspective, right? If you disagree with me, you should see it from my perspective. It's like, maybe I have some idea of this alternate perspective, right? Through any number of ways, but literature is one that I'm going to discuss here today. And I'm going to take the occasion of a passage from Heather MacDonald's book, War on Cops. Right? It's a wonderful book. She's not that famous, but the left has taken notice of her enough to shut down one of her speeches at Claremont McKenna College because she's pro-cop. The way she puts it is that cops are the ones that believe that Black Lives Matter, right? And I just love her. I basically agree with her on everything, but I'm more blunt or frank about it. Not going to be a lot of commentary for me in this video, but in Heather MacDonald's much criticized book, War on Cops, she has a whole chapter that is basically devoted to allowing the reader to get a chance to see it from the perspective of people that do sketchy shit, right? And, especially young Black men. And I think it's a very noble attempt, right? It's a whole chapter, and what it is it's a discussion of, or an outline of, Alice Goffman's book, On the Run. Right? Now, I haven't gotten to read that book yet. I will read it. I want to read it. So I encourage anyone to read it. If you want to say, oh, he hasn't read that book, so I'm not going to take his opinion seriously. Well, Heather MacDonald's read the book. I've read the Heather MacDonald book. So, just 1 degree of separation there, right? Or is that 2 degrees? Whatever. And, in the rest of the video, I'm just going to read from the book. I got it right here. And I haven't rehearsed this over and over again, and I'm going to try to, some things they read better than listening to them, like, he said, she said, whatever. I'm going to try to deal with that as I go along. And, it's a short chapter, but it'll take me some time to read. So I'm getting into it here before 4 minutes. Let's see how long this takes. So it's chapter 18, Running with the Predators, in Heather MacDonald's book, War on Cops. As the videotaped murder of a Chicago teenager brought new attention to the scourge of urban violence, a young sociologist was contemplating her experience in a rough urban neighborhood and setting about to explain the disorder. Alice Goffman, daughter of the influential sociologist Irving Goffman, lived in the inner city of Philadelphia from 2002 to 2008, integrating herself into the lives of a group of young crack dealers. Her resulting book, On the Run, was published in 2014, and a film or TV adaptation may be on the way. Goffman presents a detailed and startling ethnography of a world usually kept far from public awareness and discourse. But her book is an equally startling, if unintentional, portrait of the liberal elite mindset. She draws a devastating picture of cultural breakdown within the Black underclass. But she is incapable of acknowledging the truth in front of her eyes. Instead, she deems her subjects the helpless pawns of a criminal justice system run amok. At the center of On the Run are three half-brothers, and their slightly older friend Mike, all of whom live in a 5-block area of Philadelphia that Goffman names 6th Street. 6th Street, we are told, isn't viewed as a particularly high crime area, which can only leave the reader wondering what an actual high crime area would look like. In her 6 years living there, Goffman attended 9 funerals of her young associates, and she mentioned several others, including one for 3 kids paid for by local drug dealers eager to cement their support in the community. Goffman contends that it is the legal system itself that is creating crime and dysfunction in poor Black communities. Young men get saddled with a host of allegedly petty warrants for having missed court dates, violated their parole and probation conditions, and ducked the administrative fees levied on their criminal cases. Fearful of being rounded up under these allegedly senseless procedural warrants, they adopt a lifestyle of subterfuge and evasion, constantly in flight from an increasingly efficient and technology-enhanced police force. Once a man fears, this is a quote, Goffman writes, once a man fears that he will be taken by the police, it is precisely a stable and public daily routine of work and family life that allows the police to locate him. She says, a man in legal jeopardy finds that his efforts to stay out of prison are aligned not with upstanding, respectable action, but with being a shady and distrustful character. And then MacDonald writes again here. Goffman's own material demolishes this thesis. On the Run documents a world of law of the jungle mores, riven with violence and betrayal. Far from being the hapless victims of random legal entanglements, Goffman's euphemism for the foreseeable consequences of lawless behavior, where subjects create their own predicaments through deliberate involvement in crime. In 2002, when Goffman began her acquaintance with 6th Street, the half-brothers Chuck, Reggie, and Tim were 18, 15, and 9, respectively. All had different fathers by the same crack addict mother, Miss Linda. Their Section 8 subsidized house reeked of vomit, alcohol, and urine. Roaches and ants crawled over the inhabitants, as well as the furniture. Cat feces covered a kitchen corner, and Chuck and Reggie's arrest records had begun in their early teens. Tim would graduate from middle school to the juvenile courts when he turned 12. Fatherlessness is a virtually universal condition among the young men in Goffman's tale, but gradations exist within it. Chuck's father came around during his early years, which helps explain, says Chuck, why Chuck knew right from wrong and his young brothers did not. And that's a poignant acknowledgement of the role of fathers in raising sons, even if its premise that Chuck knows right from wrong is dubious. On 6th Street, drug dealing is tantamount to a bourgeois occupation. Chuck complains that his middle brother, Reggie, lacks the patience for making slow money selling hard drugs hand to hand. Instead, Reggie favors armed robberies to the admiration of his mother, Miss Linda. Linda says, he fearless. He a stone-cold gangsta. It would be a mistake, however, to think of a drug dealing as a peaceful activity. Early on, a disgruntled supplier firebombs Chuck's car. Chuck responds by shooting at the supplier's home. In 2007, at the end of Goffman's Chronicle, Chuck is fatally shot in the head while standing outside a Chinese restaurant, one of 3 shootings that night in Philadelphia. The killer, Goffman writes, was, quote, trying to make it at the bottom rung of a shrinking drug trade. Accompanying this drug-related violence is a more random violence that springs from dog-eat-dog exploitation and lack of impulse control. In an earlier incident, Goffman's 4th main character, Mike, another crack dealer, is walking home one night with a large wad of cash from a dice game. An armed robber accosts him, presumably tipped off to Mike's stash by the other players. Mike tries to pull his own gun, but gets shot in the hip first. Several days later, Mike sees the gunman in a Buick and opens fire. 2 days after that, Mike and his attacker drive past each other, guns blazing. Mike's car takes 7 bullets and he starts wearing a bulletproof vest. During another dice game, A young thug from 6th Street named Tino puts a gun to a fellow player's head and demands his money. His target, JJ, refuses, so Tino, who is high on PCP, kills him. JJ's fellow crew members take to driving up and down 6th Street firing at residents. Chuck gets shot in the neck, not fatally this time, and his friend Steve gets hit in the thigh. Ned, someone else, 43, supports himself in part by stealing credit cards and intercepting checks in the mail. When he and his girlfriend Jean, a crack addict, need money to pay for property taxes, they lure a cousin of Reggie, that's Miss Linda's second son, they lure a cousin of his to their house with the promise of gossip about a former girlfriend. Waiting there is a man in a hoodie who robs the cousin at gunpoint. The unintended punchline of the story, Ned and Jean also get income from working as foster parents, a fact that does not apparently give Goffman pause, but that speaks volumes, sadly, about the quality of parenting in the area. Theft is constant among 6th Street residents. Mike invited a man he met in prison to play video games at his mother's house. The guest steals the stereo, DVD player, and 2 TVs. Anthony, another 6th Street resident, was thrown out by his mother for stealing from her purse. He was turned into the police by neighbors on a warrant after stealing their shoes. When he stayed at Miss Linda's, he grumbled that he couldn't save money because she would steal from him while they slept. Mike gives Anthony crack to sell, but he could not shoot his fellow dealers when they stole from him, since his usual whereabouts at night were widely known, making him an easy target. As a result, he was not a very effective drug dealer. The mishaps of the characters in Goffman's narrative often resemble farce. You can tell that Heather MacDonald is really into the classics, okay? Reggie, on the run for a drug crime, takes refuge in his mother's house. Ms. Linda instructs him to leave before midnight, but he falls asleep. When a SWAT team arrives, Ms. Linda persuades them not to go upstairs, and Reggie jumps out the bedroom window and flees into the alley, like Cherubino leaping from the Countess's window in The Marriage of Figaro. Mike gives himself a birthday party, and the guests... Mike is the fourth main character. Mike gives himself a birthday party, and the guests start stealing liquor bottles. He sets up sentry on the windowsill, gun in his lap, threatening to pistol whip the next guy who takes a bottle. But he, too, falls asleep, and a guest lifts a wad of cash from his pocket. After the police find Reggie cowering in a shed one day, he is sent to the county jail. He wallows in self-pity because his 6 straight male friends are not visiting him or putting money into his commissary account. Niggas ain't riding right. Niggas ain't got no respect, he complains to Goffman. He says, when I come home, man, I'm not fucking with none of those niggas. Where the fuck they at? They think it's gonna be all love when I come home, like, what's up, Reggie, welcome back and shit, but fuck those niggas, man. They ain't riding for me. I got no rap for them when I touch. The residents' chaotic sex lives generate further farcical situations if one can overlook for a moment the consequences for their children. Virtually every male has a baby mom and a simultaneous collection of girlfriends. The females have children in their own series of boyfriends. After a prison term, Mike is sentenced to a halfway house in North Philly. He starts sleeping with a caseworker there named Tamara. Mike violates curfew and winds up back in prison. He tries to ensure that Tamara's visits are on different days from those of Mary, the baby mom of his 2 children. One day, however, Tamara shows up unexpectedly. Goffman says, ostensibly to visit her inmate brother. Right? So the baby mom is showing up to visit her brother, supposedly. But Tamara sees Mary and Mike sitting across from each other and says hello. Mary sizes up the situation and announces loudly, I ain't drive 5 fucking hours for this shit. Mike tries to quiet Mary down, like Don Giovanni trying to hush up Donna Elvira. But she retorts, you fucked her, didn't you? Tamara announces loudly to her brother that she really likes Mike and hopes that he is not still messing with his baby mom. While Mary conspicuously plays with Mike's hair. Mike starts talking loudly to cover up Tamara's monologue to her brother while looking desperately at Goffman to rescue him. Mary stands up and leans in for a kiss, which Mike cornered supplies. Tamara ends up in tears. I think I said that the baby mama showed up to see her brother. No, it's the girlfriend that showed up ostensibly to see her brother. The baby mama was there to see Mike. I think I mixed that up. So, but the sexual complications usually take on a more depressing aspect. At the hospital where Chuck has died after his head wound, his on-again, off-again girlfriend Tanisha shows up, but everyone wonders where the hell Chuck's baby mom, Brianna, was. Miss Linda asks Goffman to give the Pampers money, which the author has promised her, to Tanisha, who is looking after Chuck's 2 daughters until Brianna can be located. This is not an arrangement that is likely to end well. False incriminations are pervasive. When Mike was 24 and his children were 3 and 6, he started dating a woman from North Philly named Michelle. He had high hopes for her, he tells Goffman, since, as a Puerto Rican, she should be more loyal than the black chicks who love the cops and turn in their boyfriends. Moreover, Michelle's father and brothers sold drugs, so she was well accustomed to criminal proceedings. Michelle said that she loved Mike more than any man she had ever met, including her 3-year-old's father, then serving a 10-year federal prison sentence for an undisclosed crime. But Mike misses a court appointment, and a warrant issues for his arrest. The police find drugs and a gun in his apartment, which he tries to pin on Michelle and her father. The police show Michelle Mike's statement against her, as well as his texts and phone calls to Mary that indicate that he is still involved sexually with his baby mom. Indignant, Michelle tells the police everything she knows about his drug dealing. Mike writes her from jail, "Don't come up here, don't write, don't send no more money. You thought I wasn't going to find out that you a rat? Fuck it, I never gave a fuck about you anyway. You was just some pussy to me, and your pussy not even that good." Mike is the victim of double-crossing as well. Which one was that one? Oh, that's not Mike being double-crossed. That's Michelle being double-crossed. But Mike is the victim of double-crossing as well. He acts as godfather to a young hoodie-wearing tough named Ronnie, a close competitor to Miss Linda's son, Reggie, for the status of 6th Street's most loathsome figure. Ronnie started carrying a gun at 13 and shot himself in the leg while boarding a bus at 15. He periodically gets kicked out of school for such offenses as hitting his teacher and trying to steal his principal's car. He brags to Goffman that he has slept with women older than she. Goffman was then 21. Most of his days are spent running from truant officers and serving suspensions. One night, when Ronnie is 16, he and some 6th Street associates try to break into a motorcycle store on the outskirts of Philadelphia to steal motorbikes. They fail to get into the store and, when their Pontiac doesn't start, are unable to make their getaway. Ronnie calls Goffman and Mike at 2 a.m. to pick him up. Mike is at that point living in Goffman's apartment along with Chuck. The silent alarm in the motorcycle dealership has already alerted police. They arrest Ronnie and Mike, and in the station house, Ronnie falsely incriminates Mike as the mastermind behind the break-in. The police let Ronnie go and charge Mike with attempted breaking and entering. Mike spreads the word that Ronnie is a snitch. Eager to redeem his reputation, Ronnie burgles a house in southwest Philadelphia with Mike's gun and pays Mike's bail with the proceeds from the stolen TV, stereo, and jewelry. This lawlessness cascades into the legal economy as well. Healthcare workers steal antibiotics and medical supplies from their employers to provide it to their fugitive friends who are fearful of being apprehended at a hospital. Regina Austin, a law professor at the University of Pennsylvania, has approvingly referred to such pilfering employees who spread their contraband around the neighborhood as occupying the, quote, good middle ground between straightness and more extreme forms of lawbreaking. Goffman looks at this unending stream of lawless behavior and sees only the helpless pawns of a mindlessly draconian criminal justice system. She writes, quote, since the 1980s, the war on crime and war on drugs have the war on crime and war on drugs have taken millions of black young men out of school, work, and family life, sent them to jails and prisons, and returned them to society with felony convictions. That's the end of the quote. Actually, it is these men's own consistently bad decisions that remove them from lawful society. Felony convictions do not simply fall from the sky, they result from the serious criminal activity and persistence at criminal activity at that, required to induce a district attorney to actually seek a felony charge and possibly a trial. If any of Goffman's subjects made a disciplined effort at school, work, and family life, she forgot to include that detail. Revealingly, Goffman explains how she arrived at her incongruous interpretation of Sixth Street's malaise. As a graduate student at Princeton, she had been casting about for a theme for her still growing ethnographic material. Princeton was a hotbed of mass incarceration theory, she says, which holds that American prison practices have, quote, ceased to be the incarceration of individual offenders and have become the systematic imprisonment of whole groups, end quote, in the words of sociologist David Garland. Eureka. Under the tutelage of Bruce Western and other criminal justice critics, and with obvious influence from the writings of the French historian Michel Foucault, Goffman comes to see that her project could be framed as an on-the-ground look at mass incarceration and its accompanying systems of policing and surveillance. I was documenting the massive expansion of criminal justice. Oh, I missed the quote. Goffman comes to see that her, quote, project could be framed as an on-the-ground look at mass incarceration and its accompanying systems of policing and surveillance. She says, I was documenting the massive expansion of criminal justice intervention into the lives of poor Black families in the United States. Yet, Goffman's material refuses to conform to this template. To her credit, she devotes a chapter to clean people, individuals who have no dealings with the criminal justice system. A group of young men on 6th Street try to steer clear. They are a group of young men that try to steer as clear as possible from the dirty people. They remain at home at night, play video games together. They drink beer rather than smoke marijuana because there are drug tests at their jobs, which include security guard, maintenance man, and convenience store clerk. If they lose their jobs, they don't start dealing drugs. They rely on friends and family until they find another position. When they break traffic laws, they pay off their fines and recover their driving licenses before they start driving again. Their unassuming rejection of criminality comes as an enormous relief after the ugly behavior of Goffman's closest associates. Their respect for the law should be celebrated and studied, as Robert Whitson has long advocated. Just a few pages left. Thanks for hanging in there. It's the time. Remarkably, however, Goffman tries to shoehorn even these law-abiding individuals into her mass incarceration framework, resulting in the most incoherent passage in the book. In a community, this is the quote, in a community where only a few young men end up in prison, we might speak of bad apples or of people who have fallen through the cracks, she writes. But, quote, given the unprecedented levels of policing and imprisonment in poor Black communities today, these individual explanations make less sense. We begin to see a more deliberate social policy at work. In that context, simply bearing witness to the people who are avoiding the authorities in the penal system seems worth a few pages. The people featured here are all, in a variety of ways, leading clean lives in a dirty world. In so doing, they demonstrate that the criminal justice system has not entirely taken over poor and segregated Black neighborhoods like 6th Street, only part of them. And then MacDonald. It would be more accurate to say that the clean people demonstrate that lawless behavior and moral breakdown have, quote, not entirely taken over poor and segregated Black neighborhoods like 6th Street, end quote. The fact that the criminal justice system distinguishes people who break the law from those who do not shows precisely that individual explanations for who gets incarcerated are accurate, not mystifying. The clean people do not run from the police because they are not wanted by the police. Even more absurd is Goffman's description of a, quote, deliberate social policy of oppression to the prosecution of crime. If such a policy existed, there would be no reason to make exceptions for anyone. Goffman's thesis that the supervision of offenders creates more crime also lacks support in her reportage. She claims that the enforcement of warrants for missed court dates, probation violations, and unpaid court fees drives the 6th Street drug dealers and thieves underground, preventing them from joining the clean world. But she never reveals why her subjects miss their court dates. Do those court obligations inflexibly interfere with job schedules in the legal economy? She would have said so. Instead, these drifting drug dealers most likely simply lack the organization and will to make their court appointments. Goffman herself notes that many a 6th Street resident who blamed his joblessness on his fugitive status made no effort to find work when he had no outstanding warrants. As for testing dirty for drugs in violation of parole or probation conditions, no one forces a parolee to take drugs. Goffman gives us no reason to think that these thugs would behave better with less supervision, nor does she suggest what a court's response should be when they go AWOL. Goffman's most persuasive critique of the justice system is that court fees are imposed on defendants who lack the means to pay them, resulting in a vicious cycle of judgments for non-payment and further warrant enforcement and incarceration. Here too, though, Goffman shows no instance of someone making a good faith effort to pay his fees. While her young men are not prosperous, she mentions Mike's sizable collection of worldly possessions, which includes cars, motorbikes, sneakers, speakers, jewelry, and CDs. Some men may indeed lack the resources to pay their court fines, in which case the system is self-defeating. But it is also quite possible that they choose to spend their money on other things, such as drugs and sneakers. On the Run, unwittingly, demonstrates why police presence is heavy in Black inner city neighborhoods. Goffman mentions just one fatal police shooting. Anthony had shot at undercover officers in an alley thinking that they were gang rivals, and they returned fire and killed him. Otherwise, her young Black men overwhelmingly die at one another's hands, such as a friend of Chuck's shot while exiting Goffman's car outside a bar. The clean people of 6th Street do not complain about the police. Indeed, Miss Linda's father, a retired postal clerk, regularly calls the cops on his grandsons and welcomes the heavy police activity in the neighborhood. Even the 6th Street criminals try to get themselves arrested when the local gang violence becomes too hot, since prisons and jails are the only place they feel safe. Goffman claims to have witnessed officers beating up suspects 14 times in 18 months of daily observation, and asserts that the Philadelphia Police Department has an official, if the Philadelphia Police Department has an official, if sub rosa, policy of pummeling suspects who so much as put a finger on an officer. She also claims, without a source, that the cops routinely steal cash during drug raids. Such brutality and corruption, if true, must be punished and eradicated. But such police misconduct, if it exists, as it did in North Charleston, South Carolina, with Walter Scott, does not mean that lawful police activity is any less needed in neighborhoods still plagued by violence and other forms of disorder. She has a footnote over here where she says that Goffman's claims in this regard, there's been doubt cast on them, and I've read a little bit about it online, I think from Slate, and they said that, well, her problem is that she wants to protect her sources, so, she can't really verify any of these things other than just say, well, trust me. Okay, so data-driven policing and the incarceration buildup that Goffman and her mentors so decry resulted in the steepest national crime drop in modern history, especially in New York, saving countless inner-city lives, both clean and dirty. At the end of Goffman's book, Reggie and Tim are serving long prison sentences. We have no reason to believe that those punishments were not deserved. Just a few more paragraphs. I think this is interesting. Thanks for sticking with me. It is remarkable enough that Goffman, seeing the lawless behavior of 6th Street's dirty people, still views them as helpless victims of a racist criminal justice system. She has clearly been captured by her subjects. After Chuck is killed, the oldest, she chauffeurs Mike, the 4th, around the neighborhood, Glock in his lap, as he seeks to find and gun down the murderer. She feels ashamed and sorry about being white when Miss Linda's extended family complains about there being a white girl in their midst. Such pervasive anti-white antagonism is perhaps the best kept secret about Black inner-city culture. Goffman refuses to give the police information about the crimes she has witnessed. But It is even more remarkable that so many influential readers have bought Goffman's thesis that law enforcement is the predominant source of trouble in her subjects' lives. Journalist Malcolm Gladwell, lauding the book in The New Yorker, draws the conclusion that the criminal justice system blocks black criminals and their progeny from entering the middle class, unlike its treatment of the mafia. Harvard's Christopher Jenks, writing in the New York Review of Books, rues the terrible collateral damage inflicted on the young black men of 6th Street by their interminable struggle with the police, echoing Goffman's contention that such struggles simply happen rather than being the result of voluntary behavior. Like Goffman, her well-placed readers focus on the consequences of crime for the criminal and ignore the crime itself. On the Run could have been a needed corrective to post-Ferguson conceit of a racial justice apparatus arbitrarily descending on helpless black communities. But it has not been received that way. Instead, the book's reputation has demonstrated how unshakably committed liberal elites are to the belief in black victimhood, and that belief, continuously fed to the street by the advocates in the media, means that relations between the police and the community in New York and other cities will continue to be fraught with tension and danger. So that's the chapter. It's called Running with the Predators, Heather MacDonald's book, War on Cops. And the point is that she's trying to give us a view of their perspective. And I'm pretty familiar with Heather MacDonald, and she has spent a lot of time in these communities herself. She hasn't lived with a family for 6 years, I don't think, like Alice Goffman. I think that's her name, yeah. But she's familiar with their perspective, and she just comes to a different conclusion, right? So, one person's familiar with their perspective, another person's familiar with their perspective, and they disagree, right? And so what that means is that we can't rely on personal experience. We have to have conversations, and we have to hope that we can arrive at the best idea based on conversation. All right, check your personal experience.